There is a specific kind of frustration that comes with being young in a professional environment. It is not the frustration of being disrespected openly. Most of the time, nobody is overtly dismissive. Nobody says anything unkind. Nobody does anything you could point to and say, that was it, that was the moment they wrote me off. It is subtler than that. It is the meeting where you say something and nobody really responds, and then someone else says almost the same thing 10 minutes later, and suddenly it is a great idea. It is the way certain people look at you when you walk into the room. Not hostile, just briefly, automatically assessing, and then filing you in a category before you have said a single word. It is the projects that go to someone else, the opinions that get heard differently, the invisible qualifier that follows everything you do, good for someone your age, that manages to be a compliment and a ceiling at the same time. And the maddening part is that you cannot fight it directly. You cannot stand up in a meeting and say, please take me seriously. You cannot demand respect that hasn't been extended. The more visibly you want it, the further it recedes. The more you try to prove yourself, the more you look like someone who needs to prove themselves, which is the opposite of what you're going for. So what actually works? What do the young people in professional environments who get taken seriously actually do differently from the ones who keep getting overlooked, regardless of how hard they work or how good their ideas are? That is what this entire video is about. And I want to start with something that most career advice completely ignores. The reason being young in a professional environment feels so specifically undermining because understanding the mechanism is the first step to working around it. When you are the youngest person in a room, the people around you are not evaluating you purely on your current performance. They are pattern matching. They are looking at your age, your experience level, your position, and they are activating a mental model, a set of assumptions about what someone at your stage typically knows, typically does, typically contributes. That model is not about you specifically. It is a generalization built from years of experience with other people at similar stages, and you are being filtered through it before you have done anything at all. This is not malicious. It is how human cognition works. We use patterns and prior experience to make fast assessments, because evaluating every person from scratch in every interaction would be cognitively exhausting. The problem is that the model they've activated for you is probably not accurate. You may be more capable, more insightful, more ready to contribute than the pattern predicts. But the pattern is what they're responding to until you give them enough evidence to override it. Your job, and this is the frame that changes everything, is not to fight the pattern. Fighting it directly, by telling people you should be taken seriously or visibly striving for their approval, actually reinforces it. People who are taken seriously don't seek to be taken seriously. They just behave in ways that make the old pattern unsustainable. They accumulate so much counter-evidence, so consistently, that the brain of every person watching them eventually has to update the model. And when that update happens, when someone shifts from thinking of you as the young one to thinking of you as simply one of the sharpest people in the room, it tends to be permanent. So what does that counter-evidence actually look like? Let's get specific. The first thing that gets young people taken seriously faster than almost anything else is the quality of their preparation, not the fact that they work hard. Everyone who wants to be taken seriously works hard, and working hard is the minimum, not the differentiator. The differentiator is showing up to every interaction with a depth of preparation that most people at any age don't bother with. What this means practically is knowing more about the specific topic, project, or conversation than anyone expects you to. Before a meeting, know not just the agenda, but the context, the history of the issue, the prior attempts to solve it, the stakeholders, and what each of them cares about, the data that is relevant. Before a conversation with a senior person, know what they've said publicly about the things you're going to discuss. Before you offer a perspective, know the strongest version of the opposing perspective. Preparation at this level is rare at any age. In someone young, it is striking. It forces an immediate recalibration of what the brain expected. And it does something else. It gives you the internal confidence that comes from actually knowing your material, which changes how you carry yourself in the room in ways that compound everything else. The second thing is to be disciplined about when you speak. This is counterintuitive because the instinct when you want to be taken seriously is to contribute as much as possible, to show that you have things to say, that you're engaged, that you're not just sitting there taking up space. But quantity of contribution is not what gets you taken seriously. Quality is, and the difference between quality and quantity in professional conversation is largely a function of selectivity. Every time you speak in a meeting or a professional setting, you are making a deposit into or a withdrawal from your credibility account. A comment that is sharp, well-timed, and adds something new is a deposit. A comment that is slightly obvious, half-formed, or simply filling space is a withdrawal. And the withdrawal hurts more than the deposit helps because the brain is calibrated to remember the moments that confirmed its expectations more vividly than the moments that challenged them. So the discipline is this: say less, but make what you say count. Before you contribute, ask yourself one question. Does this move the conversation forward? Does it add something that wasn't already there? A perspective, a question, a piece of information, a challenge to an assumption? If yes, say it clearly and stop. If no, let it pass. The habit of only speaking when you have something real to add, and then saying it with precision and confidence and not hedging it into oblivion, creates a reputation over time. People start to notice that when you say something, it's worth hearing. And that reputation, once established, changes every interaction you have in that environment. The third thing is to ask better questions than anyone expects you to. Questions are one of the most underutilized tools for building credibility in professional environments, especially for young people. Because the assumption, the pattern that needs to be overridden, is that younger people ask questions because they don't know things. And that's true, and it's fine, and asking questions to learn is completely legitimate. But there is a different kind of question. The question that isn't about filling in your own gaps, but about probing the gaps in the collective thinking of the room. What assumption is this plan most dependent on? If this doesn't work the way we're expecting, what's the version of events that gets us there? Has this been tried before, and if so, what happened? Who is most affected by this decision that isn't in the room right now? These are not the questions of someone who doesn't know things. They are the questions of someone who thinks carefully. And in a room full of people who are used to moving quickly, the person who slows things down with the right question, the question that everyone realizes they should have asked, is not seen as junior. They are seen as sharp. The fourth thing is to manage the way you communicate in writing, because in most professional environments, writing is where a significant portion of credibility is built or eroded, and young people often underestimate how much this matters. Long, wandering emails that bury the point, messages that are unclear about what they're asking for, updates that include everything that happened without distinguishing what is important from what is noise. These habits signal, every time, someone who hasn't yet learned to respect other people's time and attention, which is one of the defining characteristics of professional immaturity. The habit to build is this: every written communication should have its most important information first. The purpose should be clear in the first sentence or two. The ask, if there is one, should be explicit, not implied. The length should be exactly as long as the content requires and not one sentence more. Writing like this, clearly, efficiently, with the reader's time as the primary constraint, is not just a technical skill, it is a signal of how you think. And how you think is exactly what people are trying to assess when they're deciding whether to take you seriously. The fifth thing, and this one operates below the surface in a way that affects everything above it, is to stop apologizing for existing in the conversation. Not literally apologizing, though that happens too, but the behavioral pattern that functions as apology. The upward inflection that turns statements into questions, the hedging before every opinion, the laugh that comes out when you're making a serious point to soften the edges of it, the overqualification of every idea before you've even finished stating it. This might be a stupid idea, but I don't know if this is relevant, but I could be wrong about this, but these are preemptive retreats. They come from the same place as people-pleasing, from the anxiety about how you're being received, dressed up as humility. But they do not read as humility. They read as uncertainty about whether your contribution deserves to be heard. And when you signal that uncertainty, you give the room permission to feel it too. The alternative is not arrogance. It is simply stating your idea as your idea. I think there's another way to look at this. The piece I'm not sure we've accounted for is, I'd push back on one part of that. Not tentative, not aggressive, just clear, present. A person who is confident enough in their own thinking to put it on the table without an apology attached. The sixth thing is about relationships specifically, because being taken seriously is never purely about performance. It is partly about who knows you, how they know you, and what they say when your name comes up in rooms you're not in. Young people who advance faster than their peers in professional environments almost always have one thing in common. They have invested in relationships with people at different levels of the organization, not to network in the transactional sense, but because they are genuinely curious about the people around them and the work those people do. They ask senior people real questions about how they got to where they are, what they've learned, what they do differently. They make themselves useful to people above them, not by being eager to please, but by being thoughtful about where they can genuinely contribute. And they are known, personally, humanly known, by the people who make decisions about who gets opportunities and who doesn't. This matters because professional credibility is built on two tracks simultaneously. One is performance, what you produce, how you contribute, how you show up in high visibility moments. The other is relationship, what people think and feel about you when you're not in the room. Both tracks matter, and the relationship track is the one that most young people focus on least. The seventh thing is to handle being wrong and being corrected with a specific kind of grace that is rarer than it should be. Because being wrong in a professional environment is inevitable. You are going to make errors of judgment. You are going to miss things. You are going to say something confidently that turns out to be incorrect or incomplete. How you respond in that moment tells people more about who you are than almost any single thing you could do proactively. The defensive response, the retreat to qualification, the attempt to explain why you weren't really wrong, the subtle shifting of context to make the error less significant. That response is natural and it is corrosive. It tells everyone watching that you prioritize your self-image over accuracy. And that is a deeply unattractive quality in a professional context. The graceful response is simple and it is almost never deployed. Acknowledge it directly. You're right, I missed that. That's a better way to think about it. I'll update my view. Good catch, I should have seen that. Cleanly, without drama, without excessive self-flagellation, without turning it into a moment about your feelings, and then move forward. That response, that clean, undefensive acknowledgement, signals something that genuine professional credibility is built on. It signals that you care more about getting it right than about being seen to be right, and that is a quality that people respect at any age and find notably rare. The eighth thing, the one that underlies and amplifies everything else, is patience, not the passive, waiting to be noticed kind, the active, strategic kind. The understanding that credibility is not built in a single meeting or a single project or a single impressive moment. It is built in the accumulation of consistent behavior over time, in the reputation that forms in the background of every interaction you have, in the slow, steady override of the pattern that was activated the day you walked in as the youngest person in the room. The young people who get taken seriously eventually, and then fully, and then early in their careers, are almost never the ones who are most visibly ambitious. They are the ones who are most consistently excellent, who showed up prepared every single time, not just when it mattered. Who said the right thing and stopped? Who asked the question that needed to be asked? Who treated being corrected as information rather than attack? Who built real relationships rather than transactional ones? Who trusted the process enough to work it without demanding that it produce results on their timeline? That patience is hard, especially when you can see clearly that you are more capable than some of the people who are being taken more seriously than you. Especially when the gap between what you know you can do and what you're being given the chance to do feels intolerable. Especially when you watch less capable people get credit for things that required less than half the thinking you've already put in. But the gap closes. It always closes. Not because seniority automatically confers credibility, but because the consistent accumulation of counter-evidence eventually overwhelms even the most stubborn pattern. Every well-prepared contribution adds to the case. Every precise, unhesitating statement adds to the case. Every question that stopped the room adds to the case. Every graceful acknowledgement of being wrong adds to the case. Every real relationship built on genuine exchange adds to the case. And at some point, not suddenly, but gradually, and then unmistakably, the case becomes undeniable. The pattern updates, and the room that once looked at you with that automatic, brief, assessing glance starts looking at you differently. Not because you demanded it, not because you proved yourself in some single dramatic moment, but because you showed up again and again as someone who could not be put in the small category they had prepared for you. That is how it happens. That is how the youngest person in the room becomes one of the most respected. Not by being someone they didn't expect, by being so consistently, undeniably yourself that who they expected becomes impossible to sustain. Drop a comment. What's the specific situation at work where you feel most overlooked right now? I want to hear the real version. Subscribe if this is speaking to something you're living. Every week, one thing that matters. See you in the next one.